Hello, and welcome to the Sociology of the Mass Media. This video is about how the media affects us and the world around us. You may also find this useful, particularly for GCSE History, GCSE RE, GCSE Citizenship, but in your subjects in general, you may have to talk about the media and content, and it's a good way to link to other ideas and other representations of people and ideas. The concept of mass media is directly linked to technology. If you think about it, media is any form of communication, usually for a group. Mass media tends to mean a large number of people, so a global audience, a national audience, or a region, such as Greater Manchester. And the links to technology tend to divide us into old and new media. So old media would be things like newspapers or even radio, which had limitations both physically and in terms of the audience it could reach or the timescale in which it could get out information. If you wanted to find out what was going on around the world, that could take weeks or months, and then eventually it could take days, and now it can be instant. And that's down to the transition to new media and the ways in which old media have often been consumed and subsumed by new media and by technology. Media formats in new media spread content usually on a screen in a digital way, using the internet mostly. So if you think about an iPad, for example, you can use it like a laptop computer. It has that capability. It has the internet. You can have all the different apps on there. You can have news on there. You can have sport, TV, and these all link together. And if you look at the physical items themselves, if you look at an old TV and the limitations of it, the lack of channels, the black and white screen, the sound, etc., compared to now, and even our habits and the way we consume TV and radio through the internet, because of the internet, because of social media, this has all made media evolve in a very quick way. And this puts a lot of things as old-fashioned out of date very quickly too. One of the key things you need to consider is how an audience responds to media. There are four models really to this that you want to consider. The old model, if you like, or the oldest model, is the hypodermic needle theory. The idea that the media is a drug, content is a drug. It's presented in a way which makes people want more, and they don't question it, they just accept it. So this came around in the 1920s with the advent of the radio and then the television. And it's very linear. It's the idea that we're literally spoon-fed information, and this is how the media can manipulate people. And this leads to moral panics, which is something we'll talk about later. Then there's the uses and gratifications model. We have the power to pick and choose what media we like. Media has come and gone because there's no audience for it. People used to sit down and watch the TV together, and you'd get tens of millions of people watching one program all at the same time. Now we have TV programs on demand, so it's consumed in different ways, measured in a different way. It fits around our lifestyle much more because of technology. And with that, so does the message and the meaning. And this overlaps with decoding theory. So if you think about it, you're given a message by a TV program, by a radio program, by a newspaper, online or in your hand. It's presented in a certain way, and you choose how to decode it. You could have a story about politics. You could have a story about football. You could have a story about what a soap star has done in their private life. Doesn't matter. How I see it as a 30-something-year-old white male could be very different to how one of my students sees it in my class, a year 10 girl, for example, because of who we are, because of our interests, because of how we perceive the world. And it's a negotiation between that. Now, the last idea is hyperreality, and this came about with Jean Baudrillard, and this was really inspired by the Iraq War, in my opinion. You had a war which was totally played out on TV. In real time, you had live updates, you saw explosions, you saw bombs going off, missiles being launched from thousands of miles away at a click of a button. It wasn't like real life anymore as we knew it. And this concept of hyperreality has been played around within all sorts of genres like sci-fi, for example, for a long time. and you may think of, say, your comic books and your action heroes and things like that, and link that to hyperreality. It's like this exaggerated, over-the-top form of the real world. And there's a real kind of credence to this because we're bombarded with images, we're bombarded with messages, advertising, for example, all the time, which distort our views of reality. And it might only do it a little bit, but how that then affects how we see the world, how we walk around in the world, how we interact with the world, how we interact with each other. So that's really hyperreality. It's very much a technology-based idea. And here is where the media overlaps with psychology, and with the limitations of its time. So you may want to consider what's available to people at different times. How is a message disseminated? How is it spread? The mass media and socialisation is a really interesting debate. There is an argument that the mass media can give us an identity and a sense of self. It can socialise us politically. It can affect democracy. And it sets an agenda. So first off, the media you consume and you're exposed to can shape your identity. As a child, you might be controlled by your parents in every way, and that includes your exposure to media. Some parents will let their children play on devices and technology and sit in front of screens for hours and hours at a time. Some parents are very conscious of that and will massively limit it. And that can be down to class, norms and values, that can be down to personal preference, it can be a lot of things. But it will shape who you are and how you see the world. Because the type of TV you grow up watching, for example, the music you listen to, the newspapers in your house that you read, the things your parents discuss and are interested in will affect you in some way. So again, it comes down to how you perceive the media and how you interact with the media itself. Political socialisation, I mean, there's a picture of Hitler and the Nazis there. The propaganda that he used is nothing new. Roman generals used propaganda, Roman emperors did. The Chinese in the communist era, Stalin at the same time used propaganda, the British used propaganda. So we might associate it with war, but it's politics all the time, political campaigning. You may see posters around that reflect different political parties. We have political party broadcasts on mainstream TV all the time, and on social media now. And this can link to agenda setting. If you think about newspapers are dwindling in terms of their circulation in physical copies, but the Daily Mail website is one of the most visited websites in the world. And how it presents stories and the stories it chooses to present, the agenda that it sets, dictates usually what the rest of the country talks about, and globally too. You may see this in all different outlets. So, for example, if you look at politics in America, the news stations are incredibly biased because they support one side or the other. It's very, very binary, and Britain is not really any different. What makes Britain special is the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, because they're not a private company. They are funded by taxpayers' money, they are responsible for that. And when they fall foul of their kind of responsibilities, it's a big scandal. And the BBC is under a lot of scrutiny because of that, more so than many other press outlets, in my opinion. So the press can decide what you see, what you hear, what you think, because it is edited and there's gatekeepers, people decide that, so it sets agendas. And this then has a huge impact on your socialisation, your exposure to politics, or your complete apathy to politics. You may hate politics because you see it on TV and it means nothing to you. And then through social media and through mass media, when people vote, you may look at the Brexit debate that's still rumbling on from 2 years ago and what's going on there and how that has played out in the media and on social media and in the real world, and think about, well, what's the truth here? What really is going on? And that's the power of the media and socialisation. I mentioned the BBC as being very different to most media outlets, and it is, but there's also a massive debate about prejudice in the BBC. There are studies which show that people who tend to feel that they are left-wing regard the BBC as very right-wing. People who see themselves as right-wing regard the BBC as very left-wing, because they see the sense of balance that the BBC pertains to having, and the sense of neutrality as giving airtime to the other side, and people focus on that, and that's very interesting. So there are ideas of pluralism, the fact that there's so much media out there now, more than ever, thousands and thousands of news outlets, whether that's blogs or web pages or newspapers or huge great agencies. The pluralists would argue that there's so much information out there, and some of it's really specialist and really niche. If you have a hobby, you can generally find websites about it, news articles about it. You can decide what to follow through social media, who to click on, who to like, who to interact with, and there's so much more choice. So pluralists would say it's a wonderful thing. Marxists would absolutely reject this and say that actually most news outlets, if they're any good, are snaffled up by huge corporations. They're owned by the same 3, 4, 5 people. So there might be 1,500 newspapers, there might be 9,000 radio stations, there might be 2,400 public radio or whatever it might be, organisations, but only 3 corporations actually own them. So that's really interesting, because you have companies within companies within companies, and any of you that study business will be able to link that much better than I can. But this leads to globalisation. There's a Daily Mail in Australia because it's owned by an Australian person who also owns the one in Britain and owns other newspapers all around the world. And one of the big criticisms of that is if they own all these different newspapers, they can have not only a massive audience, but they can set agendas, they can set out the same things. And the internet has led to a distribution of information and fake news, for want of a better term, and alternative news, and this can cause lots of issues. So you might hear talk of conspiracy theorists versus truth seeker, people like WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden exposing media lies or government lies, and how that's portrayed and how those people are treated in the media is really fascinating. And social media itself. Social media during the Arab Spring was crucial. The dictatorships, the governments in those countries were massively undermined and tried to shut down the internet, as say China does, or limit the internet as China does, or North Korea does, to stop a message getting out there. So it can have very, very inconsequential effects, or it can be huge and change the landscape in many countries, many regions. So the ownership of the media and how a message gets out there is really key. If you think of, say, terrorist videos, there was a big moral panic about beheading videos when they first started to emerge, and were the internet providers doing enough to stop that? Were platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, etc. taking them down quick enough, taking them down at all, or were they pretending it wasn't their problem? Because they're private companies, who regulates them? How much tax do they pay? This is all issues which interlink with the idea of media ownership and what that does to us as a society and how we perceive it. Media representations are a really, really good way to measure the media's impact, in my opinion. Women throughout the 20th century, as TV, radio, cinema really took hold, in the earlier half of the century, maybe up until say the 60s, women were sex objects or housewives. They were exaggerated stereotypes. And this was the same for racial minorities. Racial minorities, black people for example, in films, in TV, they're either completely absent, they don't exist, or they are negative characters, criminals for example, or minor characters. They're only got certain roles, singers, sports people, whatever it might be. And men tended to run the media, tended to own the media. They tended to, make media content. So men are often dominant. They are the way in which we compare women to men. They're the breadwinner. And this comes down to labeling and stereotyping. Whether that's how we talk about, say, Islam at the minute, and how perhaps anti-Semitism was disseminated in the early 20th century, and the Nazis used media, for example, to do that, as well as other groups of people. If you look at the front cover of GQ at the bottom there, that's a magazine aimed at men, male gaze as feminists would call it. The way one male celebrity is presented compared to a female celebrity is massively different. the sexualization of females for male audiences is something which has gone on for a long time. Now, postmodernism would argue, well, that's massively changed, and now it's about choice. You might get magazines where men are sexualized for a female or a homosexual audience. You may get magazines where women are shown as powerful. If you look at how Oprah Winfrey has not only been successful in the media, but owns and controls media now. She has her own companies, she makes a lot of money, she is an archetype almost, a role model. And that's seen as well with massive pop stars who have a very controlled media image. If you look at, say, Jay-Z and Beyonce as a power couple, but also as a media kind of franchise in their own rights and their own money making through their music, through their clothing labels, through everything they do as individuals and together is fascinating. And there we see minorities and women represented in different ways. So how the media portrays people is very much down to what we talked about earlier and how the audience receives that and responds to it. So if you look at newspaper headlines and agenda setting, Islam is very, very rarely presented in a positive light. It's almost always negative, it's almost always pejorative terms, jihadi, terrorist, that kind of thing. That is a moral panic right now. And the same is happening with knife crime and the ideas of blackness and young males. Young black males put together, if you like, are responsible for knife crime, and how that's talked about is really interesting. And this links directly into moral panics. So when Stanley Cohen looked at moral panics, he looked at mods and rockers. Their race was never mentioned. It's about them either being a mod or a rocker. They're two very arbitrary terms, very arbitrary labels that both refer to young British kids. They had certain styles of dress, certain tastes, and they fought and they clashed and they were violent. And then this is amplified. So the media representations and how they tell a story, how they present people and how they present facts is key to understanding the effect of the media and the role of it. Media violence probably encapsulates all of the issues we've raised so far in the best possible way. If you take the hypodermic syringe model, if you take any of the audience models, the copycat effect of media really plays into the idea of moral panics and the narratives around the effect of media and how powerful the media is. If you look at different murderers, for example, that have either taken inspiration from or taken elements of the way they dress, the way they commit their acts, the way they act from, say, fantasies, from Hollywood, from films, from the media in some way, there seems to be an easy link. But it also seems a way of explaining away the fact they're white and male, often. If you think about the Jamie Bulger murder, for example, that became a fascinating case study for many reasons, but the two young boys that committed that murder had watched violent, what were known as video nasties in the 80s and 90s, these horror films, and there's aspects of a particular horror film which were evident in the murder. And people have seen, people were worried about TVs in their house, people were worried about the amount of time people spend watching the TV. The same with the radio. I mean, people were very aware of how the media can be used for propaganda purposes. And we've mentioned the Nazis and their propaganda. There's no subtle link between their propaganda, between events such as Kristallnacht and the final solution, the Holocaust. One example from psychology might be Bandura and the Bobo doll. So Bandura showed different groups of kids a video of people interacting with the doll. One of the videos was fairly normal, people playing. One of the videos, adults went in and they attacked the doll in some way, or they were violent towards the doll. What Bandura then found is the Bobo doll was this big rubber doll that would bounce around. The kids that were showing the violent video would then pick up things like toy hammers and objects and hit and punch and take out aggression on the doll, particularly young boys. And this was particularly powerful because they were such young children, and it seemed to show a really clear cause between imitation, copycat, violence, and it really vindicated all of these moral panics about the media. And if you go back through history, rock and roll music, rap music, video nasties. The genres and ways videos and the way media is kind of put together, whether it's videos, music, the internet, social media, for example, and this link into violence, to sexual offences, to all sorts of things, really is why the media can never escape itself, as it were, and can never escape this idea of moral panics. In your exam for sociology, you won't need to talk about the media unless there's a specific question, but having a good knowledge of it is crucial. And obviously, the history of the media is the history of the 21st and the 20th century and beyond that. So applying that in your exam is really key. Showing changes over time, showing how the media can have an impact, can be really useful. Also, it's very good for your general knowledge. I hope you found it useful. If you need anything, or if you have any questions, leave a comment below, email me, see me in class, or leave a message on the Google Classroom. Thank you very much.